bit. Turn it up. Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. If everyone is ready, we'll get this meeting started. This is the Energy, Utility, and Telecommunications Subcommittee considering House Resolution 10, which is to create a House Study Committee on public water systems serving disadvantaged communities. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Representative Fleming if you would open us in a word of prayer, please.
Lord, we thank you for this day, this beautiful day. We thank you for allowing us to serve here. We ask you now, as we attempt to do the business of the people of this state and of this committee, that you would give us the wisdom that we need and be in this room. These things we ask in your name, amen.
Thank you. And as I say, this is a special purpose subcommittee. And at this moment, I'd like to turn the floor over to Representative Thomas to present the bill. Let's see.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. I'm State Representative Mandisha Thomas. I'm from the 65th District. I'm here to present House Resolution 10. There's been a slight change as of 2 hours ago, so we're working off of LC 510298S, if everybody has a copy of that one. Okay, great. This resolution assists us in taking a deeper dive into the Safe Water Drinking Act and how we can further benefit from the act by understanding its many components that's applied to Georgia through the GEFA, which is Georgia Environmental Finance Authority. And I'd like to provide this body, did it go out? Are we on? Yes. I'd like to provide this body with a little history. Georgia's nearly 11 million residents gets their water from surface water and groundwater. The metropolitan Atlanta region gets 99.9% of its drinking water from surface streams, rivers, reservoirs. Communities like Albany, Bainbridge, Burnswick, and Valdosta rely exclusively on groundwater and wells for drinking water. An unknown number of Georgians rely on private drinking water wells. Now, one little fun fact I'd just like to offer that Georgia is primarily a groundwater state, according to the Georgia Association of Water Professionals. And out of 159 counties in Georgia, Gwinnett County came in under a blind test around the state as the best tasting water in Georgia. And this committee wants to know why. The Safer Water Drinking Act is governed under the federal EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And EPA defines the Safe Drinking Water Act as protecting Americans' drinking water. EPA has established protective drinking water standards for more than 90 contaminants, including drinking water regulations issued since the 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act that strengthens public health protection. Now, there's over 92% of population supplied by community water systems receiving drinking water that meets all health-based protections at all times. Under the Safe Water Drinking Act, EPA on the federal side are to work together across the states of the country to ensure protection against contaminants in our water drinking systems, as well as making sure that the water standards for the country are met. With that being said, this study committee would do the following to help us break down the water quality of disadvantaged communities across Georgia to provide recommendations for additional resources that can work concurrently with the Safe Water Drinking Act. So we've broken down kind of what this act would look like, or this committee would look like. We would start to review the community water systems, and there's approximately 54,000 across the nation. Water systems are public and they serve the same people year-round. Most residents include homes, apartments, and condominiums in cities, small towns, and mobile home parks are served by community water systems. Georgia actually has 1,752 community water systems, which 1,131 are privately owned and 1,639 service populations of 10,000 or fewer, which is part of the definition of EPA's disadvantaged communities under the Safe Water Drinking Act. We would also, as a committee, along with identified speakers and presenters, will break down the geographical locations of the 1,702 communities across the state and assessing the following. We're going to look at the water infrastructure, the systems to include drinking water, wastewater, stormwater. Unless the committee finds it more advantageous to only work with one of those three, then I would yield to drinking water only. We would also look at the contaminant and toxin levels to include sewage spills, creeks, streams, rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, along with the cost of fines being collected towards the spillages of financial acuity of those fines. After the cleanups, we would hope that the funds are being put into disadvantaged communities towards clean water programs such as aquatic studies. And honestly, the Chattahoochee River Keepers have been doing a great job with providing aquatic studies to citizens across the state of Georgia. The third portion of this committee would focus on drinking water and public health. So that's where we have our boil advisories. How many boil water advisories were issued in 2022, and how does this compare with the previous years? How many boil water advisories were issued during the 2022 Christmas deep freeze? What lessons have been learned to avoid and the loss of drinking water systems in the future? Once we move there, we would go to lead and emergency contaminants. How is the state of Georgia preparing and working with communities to conduct complete federal required lead service lines and pipe inventories by October 2024, which is a federal guideline? What has the Georgia Environmental Protection Division learned from its investigations and monitorings of PFOAs and PFAs, which are compound chemicals, and they're like sulfate and acids? Also, we would be including what are the anticipated next steps for EPD. Also, lead in drinking water in Georgia schools. What has the Georgia Department of Education learned from their Clean Water for Georgia Kids program? The next component is community action agencies and customer assistance. There's about 20 community action authorities across the state of Georgia, so we don't have one in every county, but every county is served. And it's under the Division of Family and Children Services, managing the federal funded low-income housing water assistance program. DFACS works with community actions and participating public water suppliers to administer the program. We want to look at that. What is the status of the program? How many and which public water suppliers are participating in the program? What has DFACS learned in the process, and how can the program be improved? The Low-Income Housing Household Water Assistance Program is a new program. Historically, the action authorities work with heating and cooling. This program came on about a year and a half ago to help pay water bills of disadvantaged or low-income residents in the state of Georgia. Their customer assistance programs, how many public water utilities in Georgia manage customer assistance programs? We want to look at that too. But there's also a rural portion to this study committee. How can the state help advance implementation of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is under the RDWS, and that's the Rural Decentralization Water Systems Grant Program. Some Georgia Resources Conservation and Development Councils receive grants from the USDA to increase access to clean, reliable household drinking water, wells, and replace septic tanks in rural Georgia. If time permits in this study, because from what I know, you get about 3 or 4 days. We would like to look at compliance and regulation and program reviews. Some of those programs are the UIC program, which is the Underground Injection Control Program. We definitely want to look at the Drinking Water Standards and Reporting Regulations. We may have a chance to look at the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, which is also known as WIN, and we definitely would look at the Small Underserved Disadvantaged Communities Grant. Some of the particulars and objectives that we would do through this committee is determine how GFA and the state is taking advantage of the SWDA, Safe Water Drinking Act. We would also look at GFA's affordability criteria. It's a tool that Georgia uses when distributing the SRF, which is the state revolving fund, and they use this to determine if the community is disadvantaged or to determine if the community is eligible for loan forgiveness. So the committee would determine if the state can help communities who did not meet the qualifications for loan forgiveness and make professional recommendations. Not only do we want to include the review of GFA's state revolving fund, but we also want to look at the BIL, which is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And we do want to determine how the federal infrastructure bill can provide increased funding for disadvantaged communities. We also want to determine how many fines from sewage spills are collected and spent towards the recovery. Some of the committee recommendations, and this will probably differ from what I'm speaking today, but just what we foresee would probably be to provide a list and determine how municipalities and counties can take advantage of other financial resources from the state, how community action authorities can better engage in disadvantaged communities in their low-income water program. We want to recommend how the state can provide technical assistance to disadvantaged communities, and what public water systems compliance enforcement trends can Georgia's Environmental Protection identify based on the 5 years of compliance summary reports, and to see if the types of violations are changing or more system failing to submit consumer confidence reports. I've done quite a bit of research on this. And my industry expert list includes Gary Hawkins of UGA Water Resource Management Policy Specialist from Cooperative Extension, Chris Malinanjo, Water Policy Director for Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, Wanda Mosley, Director of South Fulton Environmental Justice Academy, Doug Teeper, Policy Manager, Conservation Voters, and Mr. Lawrence A. Reeves, President of Aldrich Services, which is a local environmental company, and not to mention Mark Woodall, who's the legislative chair for the Sierra Club. That is it in a nutshell, Chairman. If we have any questions, I know there's a few people that have signed up that would like to speak to the resolution today.
Okay, thank you. And this is just one study committee you're asking for, right?
It's one study committee.
'Cause that was quite a list. That was a very, very thorough list. We do have a question, Representative Werkheiser.
Thank you. Wow, I'm out of breath. What brought you to this? What happened that this became a concern?
Two things. We can go back prior to me being elected, being from California. I've never received a water boil advisory. I live in the South Fulton area. At the time, we were unincorporated. And so we didn't have any government but Fulton County commissioners. And we would receive water boil advisories like out of this world. And I thought that was strange. The second thing, as me being elected, Chairman, we did have, I do have quite a few people in my district that are concerned about our water and our toxin levels, and receiving toxin notices from those annual reports after the flushing. The city is required to send out a notice, and the notice would say that this level is not enough to really do anything to your body. You would have to be living there for 40 or 60 years for it to build up to something. But my community, and I'm sure there's more communities across the state of Georgia that have seniors that have been in their homes for 40 and 50 and 60 years. So what does that tell you about what it's doing to their health? Also on those letters, it tells you what the percentage of the toxin level is, but it doesn't give you a range. So I felt like, just as when you go to have your blood work with your physician, it tells you what the range is, and it tells you if you're negative or lower or higher, and these letters don't do so.
Great job.
Any other questions on the committee? Okay. Thank you, Representative Thomas. And you say there are some folks that would like to speak.
Yes, there was a couple of people that I believe, that signed up that would like to speak, Chairman.
Do we have a sign-up list? Or? Okay.
We don't.
Just anybody that would like to speak, you're welcome to come up to either one of the podiums or either one of the microphones up here and just introduce yourself. Just not everybody at once. Just please introduce yourself, let us know who you represent, and proceed.
Certainly. All right, good. Great. Thanks for having us here for public comment. My name is Chris Manganello. I am Chattahoochee Riverkeeper's Water Policy Director. Chattahoochee Riverkeeper is a conservation nonprofit. We've got about 10,000 members or so, and our mission is to make sure there is enough clean water in the Chattahoochee River for all the folks that need it, all the different businesses, and all the other needs, communities up and down the river. We are here to speak in support of H.R. 10, really for two primary reasons. First, we support the General Assembly's intent to monitor, track, and improve the distribution of federal dollars for the safe and clean drinking water projects all over the state. Second, we support this body's intent to evaluate trends in safe drinking water compliance and enforcement. At the end of the day, H.R. 10 will help the General Assembly better support safe and clean drinking water in urban and rural communities all across Georgia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone in the committee have any questions for, I'll call you Chris.
Chris, that's fine. That works.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Next, anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name's Doug Teeper, and I am the policy manager for Georgia Conservation Voters, which is an organization that's for clean air and clean water across the state of Georgia. We're not a membership organization, but we have staff across the state of Georgia, and we are very much interested in seeing people, especially underserved communities, have the same kind of resources that some of the larger communities have. Very quickly, I think one of the great things about having a study committee is accessing taxpayers' money that the federal government has already appropriated, and we want to make sure Georgia, especially our rural communities, get our share. There are plenty of small communities, and by the way, I was a little concerned when the title was small or disadvantaged communities. That's actually defined by the Environmental Protection Agency. And I think pretty much almost every member of the House, I served in the House for about 16 years, and I know there were plenty of communities that could not go to Wall Street and float a bond to fix their water systems. And what happens to those communities that have issues? And I think it's a great idea to have a study committee to see what kind of grants are accessible so that we might be able to fix some of these small rural communities. So I would very much encourage this committee to look at having a study committee to do such a thing as look for the accessible funds.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think we have one question. Representative Fleming?
Thank you, Doug. You voted on 1,000 of these things. And do you have a copy of the resolution by any chance?
I do. Well, I have the original HR 10. I don't have the. Okay.
I was just curious of the effect of like line 10 when we vote on the language there, even though it's a study committee that says it is further declared that the state of Georgia shall assume responsibility for the quality of such waters.
I also saw when you assume responsibility, does that open it up for liability if you can get sued? Couple of things about that, and Representative, as you well know, as a distinguished attorney, I believe, yes?
Well, some of my clients call me a lawyer, not all of them.
Whether or not you'd open yourself up to suit if there was a problem with the water, there is sovereign immunity that protects the state for the most part. So I don't think that's standard boilerplate language, and I think y'all have seen that in a number. But there is I think among your constituents, there's an assumption that when they turn on their water faucet, in whatever community you live in, that someone is doing the right thing. I know there have been some issues around the country with lead in the drinking water, for example, and what happens quite often is the community is responsible for fixing it. So, but it's a very good question, but I don't think that individually the city would be liable for suit.
Well, I'm more worried about the state right now, but I was going to ask you, instead of the word shall assume responsibility, how would you feel about is concerned?
I'll defer to the author of the bill,
Okay.
but I just think it's a great idea that if y'all were willing to pass forward the idea of a study committee, that you could perfect the language.
Sure.
But I think it's a real opportunity for the state to access what is our people's money. You know, when people say it's federal money, well, it's the working people's money, you know, so, and it's already been authorized by the federal government. So I think it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, Chairman Dickey?
Don't have a question, but I just got a comment. Yeah, I represent, I think, 8 or 9 cities, 5 counties, and you know, upgrading water and sewer systems is really very expensive for them right now. They got an aging systems that they're trying to access funds, federal loans, state funds. You know, they're right. So it's a real challenge, I think, for a lot of our communities. But those communities, in my opinion, we got several authorities in my district: Macon Water Authority, Fort Valley Utility Commission, that I think do a real good job. And some other cities, small and large, that manage their wastewater and drinking water system. And I know it's a challenge. I think our EPD does an excellent job on monitoring, setting regulations, setting rules. In fact, I was one of those private water system owners at one time. The best day of my life when county came in and put their system in, and I didn't have to do those reports and things anymore. So I just, the study committee, and I know your passion, you're on my ag committee and have a passion for communities, and but man, it's a long list for a study committee to tackle. I would suggest we narrow this thing somewhat, if we even want to consider it way too broad, Representative. But you know, I feel like our communities that manage our safe drinking water, they don't care where in that community, whether it's disadvantaged areas or advantaged areas, that people deserve clean, safe drinking water, and I don't think they differentiate where on that system that water goes. And so anyway, just some thoughts. Again, I appreciate your work on this, but pretty broad for study committee to delve into all of you. And I'd love a copy of your presentation. Maybe this committee might want that too. But anyway, that's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Chairman Parsons?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Representative Thomas, I wanted to say pretty much the same thing that Chairman Dickey said. I think that if you could get us all a copy of your presentation so we could kind of go back over the things that you had mentioned in there and that you're wanting to achieve, because they really don't, I mean, I guess, I didn't hear all of them because I came in a minute late, but it almost looks to me like, looking through the resolution here, that this is the report back from the study committee more than it is what you're asking the study committee to do. You know, from about line 10 all the way to the end of it, it's things that you're saying that whereas it would be beneficial to the citizens of this state for the General Assembly to do these things. Well, that's not asking a question. That's saying, you know, that's saying this is what I'm presenting here. That's the way it looks to me. I would just suggest pretty much the same thing that Chairman Dickey said. I think that it would be good for us to have a copy of your presentation, and I really appreciate it. And then for you to go through it too, and then look at the language in your resolution. It probably needs to be changed really to what you're asking the study committee to find out. I mean, you're saying things in here that you found these things out. Now you're stating them. That's how I'm seeing it anyway. I may be wrong. I mean, that's how I'm seeing it. It just needs to be the study committee is looking to find answers, to go out, you know, get the committee together and bring people in, have hearings, and find answers to questions. And these really aren't. I'm not seeing them as questions in here. You probably have the questions in your presentation, but that needs to be actually part of the resolution. That's how I see it, and that's how I would hope that it would be before we ever took any action on it. And as a chairman of the committee that it has to come to, I guess that would be that'd be my recommendation to you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the resolution? Okay, any other questions on the part of the committee? All right, if not, as I said, this was going to be a hearing only, and given some of the suggestions that were made, let's work together on, see about getting some things made. And if you could share your presentation with the committee members, just get it to Bailey or JC1, and they'll get it to us. That'd be great, Representative Thomas. Any other questions or comments on your part?
Well, to Representative Fleming's point on line 10, I am amenable to consider that, and I'll just confer with some of the individuals that I've been working with on it. I do hear you, Chairman Dickey and Chairman Parsons, so we can take this back to council and see if we can further define it. Just some final thoughts. I know I wanted to consider what the governor had already did with the $422 million of American Rescue Plan Act money. And it was originally half of that. They had to go back and double that up. But it was spread over 116 entities. And when you look at that list, there was not many from the urban areas. So I think it was Douglas County, Smyrna, and Gwinnett County that made it out of the 116. So we do want to analyze that and make some more recommendations for some of the urban areas that are disadvantaged in water.
If I may, Chairman. If I may, and that's kind of my point, I guess. The recommendations, they need to be coming back from the study committee. I mean, you're going out and hearing the issue, hearing the problem, hearing what people say, and then have recommendations come back. Maybe that's what you just said. I may have just misunderstood, and I may be misunderstanding a lot of this, but that's the thing. You really want to make it clear that the study committee is to find out things. That's why you're having. That's why you're studying, and this kind of almost, and I don't mean this derogatory, but almost the way it's written, it's almost saying, okay, we know the answers, and now we're going to get people together and tell them what the answers are. It's kind of the way this is written. That's what I would say anyway.
Thank you, Chairman. And like I said, we will go back and look at how it's written.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions or speakers, then we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.